reiterate to everyone that with this webinar, we're also launching a really exciting case study compilation effort that we'll tell you about at the end. So I hope you stay all the way to the end. Today, our building capacity for law enforcement conversation with Sal Amato from the USAID Wildlife Asia activity. Sal has a great deal of experience in wildlife enforcement from his first career and first life at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then other work that he's done with INTERPOL. So I'm really excited to have him talk about his experiences in connection with our learning questions for our collaborative learning group, which if you go to the next slide, Sean, just to remind everybody that we have a theory of change approach on our learning questions, and the three strategic approaches on the left here, the reducing consumer demand, increasing community conservation action, and building capacity for effective enforcement and prosecution are the three of the most common strategies in USAID's interventions to reduce wildlife trafficking. So our learning questions focus on explicit questions around those theories of change, with these guiding questions. In particular for today's conversation, what are the characteristics of effective law enforcement capacity building? And so we have the great opportunity to go through all these questions, and Sal has prepared kind of how to summarize his ample experience in this field with us today. And to the next slide, I wanted to introduce Jesse Taweekan from the Regional Development Mission in Asia, who is the COR for USAID's Wildlife Asia activity. And Jesse's going to talk to us a little bit about the Wildlife Asia project and then introduce Sal. So over to you, Jesse.
All right, thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. I'm Jesse from RDMA. Thanks, Megan, for brief introductions. So I'm the COR for the current USAID Wildlife Asia. Just want to give you a bit of background of RDMA working on wildlife trafficking. So can you please go to the next slide? Next slide, please. All right. So RDMA has been.
Go back one, Sean?
Yeah,
I think there's a bit of a delay. Yeah.
Right. This one. So RDMA has been working on CWT activities for about a decade. So we started in 2006 with the ASEAN WEN support program. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So basically 10 countries in Southeast Asia to form a wildlife enforcement network at the regional groups. And then RDMA helped them to strengthen like law enforcement capacity building at the regional levels in all 10 member countries. And then we engage with other stakeholders, you know, to understand their roles, what they have to play in combating wildlife trafficking. At that time, it's very new to all of them. And then once the activity ended in 2011, we continue our effort and expand our scope to cover demand reduction part, which is very important in Asia. That leading to the new project called the ARREST, the Asia Regional Response to Endangered Species Trafficking. So that project ran from 2011 to 16. And at the end of the ARREST project, we took lesson learned, we discussed among ourselves, talking with USG agencies like Fish Wildlife Service, State INL, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and discuss about how we can improve and do the comprehensive follow-on projects. And then we discussed the theory of chain, the result chain of the project. And at the end, we come up with the IDIQ. Well, initially, we thought that RDMA is a service mission. It's regional mission. So we shouldn't do the standalone one big project, but we should do an IDIQ, which if bilateral mission are interested, they can buy into this mechanism and use it to fast track their mechanisms. So we award the new 50 million counter wildlife trafficking IDIQ last year. So if you are interested to know more about IDIQ, you can ask myself or Megan, so we can send you the fact sheet of the IDIQ. So RDMA buy into the first task order called USAID Wildlife Asia. That's 23 million. So can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so this is the overview of USAID Wildlife Asia. So we have four objectives. We talk about demand reduction as objective 1. The second one is strengthen regional law enforcement capacity and coordination, talking with law enforcement capacity building and also link between Asia and Africa. Africa is the source of wildlife trafficking. And the third one is increased political will. And the last one is regional coordination of counter-wildlife trafficking. And the target species that we are focusing on, including the elephant ivories, rhino horns, tiger products, and pangolin scale. So today we want to focus on objective 2, strengthen regional law enforcement capacity and coordination. And as Megan mentioned, we have a special guest with us today, Sal Amato, with his extensive experience working in, Fish Wildlife Service and with INTERPOL. So he could be a good resources for us to learn from him and, learn from his experience and how we can implement that into Wildlife Asia or beyond. So the floor is yours, Sal.
Thank you, Jesse. Good morning or good evening all, depending on where you've dialed in from. Yep, there I am. You can go to the next slide. I thought it'd be worthwhile just to jump into the activities. These are our year 1 activities in that objective 2, which centers around strengthening regional law enforcement capacity and coordination. And we're engaged in an effort we're calling institutionalization of capacity for effective enforcement. I'm knee-deep right now in a assessment that we just completed. I have a draft that I've been going back and forth with our subcontractor on in terms of an institutional needs assessment. And frankly, defining that word institutionalization in case that people aren't on the call that aren't familiar with that, that basically means that we are looking to deliver capacity in a way that it becomes the norm or the standard way for an organization to do business after we've delivered that competency or that skill. We're doing, like I said, we're involved in an institutional needs assessment. We're going to be looking to form an institutionalization working group and then begin working with that needs assessment and that working group to start to actually determine where to deliver the capacity, how to deliver the capacity, and how to make sure that we're doing it in a way that produces meaningful change in the organizations we're looking to build up. At the same time, we're going to be looking to build a cadre of trainers, both external trainers and internal trainers, because the ultimate goal of this training is to have these organizations that we're training own these programs and take over these programs, including building cadre of trainers internal to themselves. And then we have an activity that obviously looks to evaluate that training, validate that training, make improvements, and then the cycle keeps going. So next slide, please. So another component of these first year activities for us is to undertake activities that we see as strengthening regional law enforcement capacity and coordination, specifically regional, international, and interinstitutional law enforcement cooperation and coordination. So we were involved, we took on a political economy assessment that looked at a specific political economy question that we asked. It was basically about regional platforms and the current status, and make some recommendations about that. And I know, I believe the status of the ASEAN may be of interest to some of you, so I'll talk about that when we dive into some of the specific questions. But within this activity, we're also doing activities we call Special Investigation Group Workshops, SIG workshops. And we've completed one that we held here in Bangkok in February. And we are about to hold one in Lusaka, Zambia in June. And then we're looking for out years to also hold these as a regular event and coordinate these events with others that are doing similar activities, such as the UNODC, and I'll explain a little bit more about that when I talk about partnerships as well. So if you can move on. So Megan, did you want to?
Sure. Let's kick it off with just some questions. I think that was a great introduction to what kind of work you're doing with Wildlife Asia. Just kind of for our first question, you talked a little bit about the ASEAN WEN, and you're right, I think a lot of us would really like to know more about what's going on with ASEAN WEN and with wildlife enforcement networks kind of writ large. You know, what are the factors necessary for that kind of cooperation and processes to coordinate among national, subnational, and local institutions like the goal of the WENs?
Right, thank you. And honestly, this is a very big challenge for us right now. In many ways, the ASEAN WEN, the ASEAN Wildlife Enforcement Network, gets held up as a flagship. It was one of the first that was implemented. It had some very good successes for a number of years through operations such as COBRA. But to be honest with you, it's in a status right now of complete flux. It's very recently morphed into a group they're now calling the ASEAN Working Group for CITES and Wildlife Enforcement. And no matter how you paint that, the reality of that is that move and effectively watered down the law enforcement focus of that network. It's become more of a policy. It rolled in more of the CITES regulatory issues as opposed to the more mainstream enforcement and policing issues of wildlife crime. So in a lot of ways, that organization has taken a step backwards. It still remains to be seen exactly how that settles out. But we have a challenge, and the challenge is trying to figure out what regional platform to use that has regional ownership that can help us bridge cooperation across law enforcement authorities, not only here in the region, but more internationally, and specifically to a lot of the source countries for wildlife products coming from Africa. So in particular, we've reached out to INTERPOL, which is a fairly recent group with not a whole lot of staffing behind it, but it does have a mandate for coordinating regional law enforcement. And we're looking to work with that group to see if they can take on that role. They will be in attendance at our workshop that I mentioned in Lusaka in June, and we're looking to support them on taking on that role. Just to paint a bigger picture of what's going on is there is a fairly effective, fairly well-established regional platform for coordinating law enforcement efforts in Africa called the Lusaka Agreement Task Force, the LATF. When we try to interject the regional, the ASEAN components and the ASEAN partners into that mix, they either come as just very discrete national entities, or that's why it's so important, we feel, that to bring in a regional platform that can help coordinate that and make that bridge. We're also engaged with INTERPOL to try to, frankly, make the bridge between the two regional networks, the one in Africa and the one in Asia. And the way these investigative group meetings have gone is we've brought in these regional platforms, the country members and the country stakeholders, and then had INTERPOL acting as a bridge and a communication mechanism between the two. It does leave us asking, where is the now ASEAN Working Group for CITES and Wildlife Enforcement? What role do they play? How should we engage with them? And to be honest with you, we're finding our way on that.
Well, I think maybe just a follow-up question for you or for Jesse, because Jesse was certainly involved in the early WEN support program. Kind of what, if you had to tease apart what the factors were about why that happened, does anything stand out to you? About, what kind of caused the collapse of this network? I think that would be relevant because several of the colleagues on the line here are actively engaged in trying to set up their own kind of WEN networks, whether that be in the Caribbean or in Africa. Kind of what lessons can you look back at now and say, okay, make sure not to do that, or make sure you do this?
Yeah, well, hi Megan, this is Jesse. I think political will it's one of the most important things, because when we start at the ASEAN WEN support program, we're just helping them setting up the system, but we did not talk with people related to that, like the parliamentarian or some higher level. We're just focusing at the lower levels. So that's why it didn't go far. We need political support for that. We need people to be aware. And also, wildlife trafficking is not just under the Ministry of Environment. We have to go beyond that. We have to include custom. We have to include police, prosecutors, judges. When we focus wildlife trafficking, like wildlife enforcement network, we have to go beyond just traditional group of people, but for all relevance. And also we have to work at the bottom up and top down levels. So that's why, like in Wildlife Asia, we add the new components that not in the arrest project, which is the increased political will. We have to engage at the parliamentary levels with MP. We have champion member of parliaments to help us moving that agenda. I think that will help us a lot in strengthening the network.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jesse. If I can add to that too, is one of the key findings of our political economy analysis that whether you agree with it or not, because it's perception, but and I'll just read it. It says, a strong and somewhat negative perception that regional platforms are supply rather than demand driven exists among many of the stakeholders and partner groups. I think that's interesting because what it's saying is that the region itself didn't recognize that they needed a way to coordinate across national borders, and that the external community did and tried to push it on them. And I bring that up because, one, it's hard for me to wrap my head around because it is such a needed aspect to take on transnational organized crime, which wildlife crime definitely is. But it also reiterates one of the first things I said, which is why these regional WENs have to have regional buy-in. They have to be locally owned, they have to be managed by the region, or they will be viewed as these supply-driven platforms that are somebody else's agenda.
Okay. Thanks. I think those are all really, really important lessons, and I think we're going to be coming back to those more in the future as well. I think this is really connected to the next question, so I want to move on to the next question, if you can move that slide. I know you started to touch on it a little bit when you started to talk about INTERPOL, but in your experience, what are some successful examples of partnerships that are used to deliver capacity building activities, and kind of what made them work?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And maybe I just wanted to lead in, and not something I put on paper, but it is sort of just how I approach pretty much the work we're doing right now in this arena, is that the stuff that we do that builds partnership, is collaborative, and works to coordinate and work jointly and support each other are the right things. And frankly, the things that we do that draw lines around us and become territorial and demand that somebody stays over there because we're doing this are frankly just counterproductive. And I've taken the approach for a big part of my career that partnerships and collaboration are what it's all about. And so with that said, we have a couple of very good examples, I think, of partnerships that we're using right now in Wildlife Asia. One is we're partnering up with INL, Strengthening Cross-Border Enforcement Program in Africa, and we're doing joint workshops, those special investigation groups. So they're being jointly funded and jointly coordinated by that INL program in Africa and the USAID Wildlife Asia program, which is obviously bringing in the Southeast Asian participants. So we did one in Bangkok, and we brought a number of participants from the police, customs, prosecutor's office, wildlife authority offices to Bangkok, and then in June, as I mentioned, we're bringing a bunch of the similar participants from Southeast Asia to meet with participants from Africa and Lusaka. I just mentioned that because it's a very good example of how two programs that had a mandate to do coordinating activities have teamed up and are now delivering on something that's more than each of them could have individually implemented. Similarly, I'm engaged, which is sort of the nascent status of it, but I've been in touch with the UNODC. I think arguably the UNODC's law enforcement support program in this region and Wildlife Asia are probably the two biggest activities taking on CWPT projects in the region, certainly by funding. So we decided to work together, and not surprising when you're the two biggest programs delivering these types of activities in the region, there's going to be overlap, and we could have either just drawn lines, and I'll be honest with you, in the past all we've done is coordinate. We just told each other what we're doing, but not gone a whole lot further in terms of actually trying to figure out where you could work together, where you can build off each other. And so we're really trying to do that. So I think it's a very new partnership, but we're looking at co-funding some training activities towards the end of this year, and certainly looking to co-fund some very similar these network building workshops in the next couple of years. It just makes sense to, if you have a mandate to do very similar activities, rather than do them in isolation, to actually work on them together and make sure you're building off of each other. Mm-hmm. So I would just highlight those as two very good examples.
Yeah, I think that's great, especially your INL partnership that links Asia and Africa and your work with Interpol. Can you talk more about kind of what you did to set those up and kind of just to tease apart some more about what made them work? I mean, what were the factors that did that? Did you have a facilitator? Was it just your one-on-one interactions because you knew the person, or kind of, what made that happen?
Well, it was because frankly, it was because one of our subcontractors, Freeland, was involved in implementing INL funds in Africa and was also involved in, so it was a very intuitive bridge. But luckily, we saw the value of bringing those two programs together and building what we've accomplished so far. So yeah, it literally was just the fact that an organization was involved in both of those programs that we were able to put those together.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of any kind of partnership that you've been involved in that didn't work so well?
Well, I thought about that, and to be honest with you, it's invariable. I think about any times where we've been less than successful with our partnerships, and to, shame on us, it's almost exclusively because of personalities, and conversely, when they're working, it's also because of personalities. What I mean by that is, when you've got somebody in play that's willing to be collaborative, sees the value in building partnerships and not building walls, I think that great things happen. And the term I've always used is when we're willing to take our bowling shirts off and just work towards a common good. It's just amazing what we can accomplish. And I guess I'm just asking everybody on the call to just think about that, because we do a lot in terms of, wrapping our arms around something and saying, this is mine, and why is this person intruding over here, because we're already doing that. But the real answer, I think, is to just actually sit down, and it might be that somebody's got a very good cog on something, and we should go spend somewhere else where there's a more identified need. But I think 9 out of 10 times you'll find that it just means we need to figure out how to support each other, how to build off what that other group is doing, and like I said, to me, it's a shame, but it's almost invariably when it's not working, it's literally because some personality won't let it work.
No, I totally appreciate that factor. We have 2 questions from people on the webinar here that are directly relevant to this question, so I'm just going to toss them out there. And specifically with INL, you talked a little bit, but maybe you could go into more depth, like how did you coordinate with them, or how did you work to reduce the redundancy or overlap, or are you just accepting that and willing to take it? Or are you really kind of working more on, well, like we're better at this, so we're going to do this kind of training, and you're better at that? Did you focus on those things?
Yeah, no, I think the easy answer to that is these are literally co-funded events. The next, I think, just by the nature of when you have to send people a longer distance, you're spending more on travel than others. But like the amount of our estimated cost for this workshop in June, it's just about down the middle in terms of, INL is putting in this amount and we're just about matching it. But it literally just becomes a co-funded, co-coordinated event. So I've got a training coordinator that is very experienced in doing this, very good at doing this, and she's helping coordinate the travel and the visas and the transportation and everything. So we're coordinating our Southeast Asian participants that we're sending, and that takes that off of the shoulders of the African coordinators who have to make sure they get their participants there. So it's literally we're working on this together. And to get a little bit more in the weeds about what you're asking is I'm going to this as a trainer, and I've offered I looked across their curriculum and I said, I'm very comfortable here, here, and here. How can I help you? And so we're bringing in our expertise where we can. They're bringing expertise where they've got it, and together I think we're going to deliver a pretty good product.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Megan. This is Jesse. Just to add from Sal. That's the activity levels, but as I mentioned for USAID Wildlife Asia, in the last part is the coordination. So basically I coordinate with, from USAID side, I coordinate with INLC in Washington just to align what they are doing, especially this year. As you know, they have wildlife trafficking money earmark quite a lot, so we do coordinate in terms of what they are doing and how we can support them, because INL work globally and we need to make sure that our efforts are not duplicative. In the past, I have to admit, under the ARREST project we have duplicative effort. They training something, we training on the same thing different days. We're trying to avoid that, I have to admit, in the past. So that's why in Wildlife Asia we add that components just to make sure that we coordinate among ourselves better.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks for that. We had another question from a participant who wanted to know more about what the response has been about from like operational on the line folks like customs or police. Do you have any experience with them, either from the SIG or from other training that you're doing?
So, sorry, ask the question again, because we are engaged with customs authorities in these events.
Just kind of what has their response been?
It's universally they're supportive. They want to be part of these events. Sort of a litmus test to the success of our Bangkok SIG was, we did a little bit of training, we did a little bit of awareness, we did a little bit of sharing of real-time, you know, actual issues that these countries are dealing with. And then we gave some time and we did something I like to call, you know, country speed dating, which is literally we just gave two countries time to work issues and gave them the support and time to actual work ongoing law enforcement issues. And one of the things that you know, hit me square between the eyes was that we had to do this to make sure everybody was talking to everybody. We had to really, you know, we had to be real on the clock in terms of you can talk to this country for the next 40 minutes and then we're going to have to rotate. And invariably, when we went to rotate, every one of them looked over and were like, hold on a minute, we're knee deep in something. And I thought that was just great. That means they were working actual issues and they were engaged, and you know, people weren't just sitting around waiting to move to the next thing. And so I guess that's my way of saying it really seemed effective. It really seemed like we got the right players together. And once, like I said, once people are willing, you build a little trust, and they know, you know, this person sitting across the table from is willing to try to help them with their issues, great things can happen. And so there was some really good conversation that led into some really good follow-up from that, but that was my indicators that they wouldn't stop talking.
Wow. Well, I think that's a really good segue into what was the next question that I had for you based on our learning questions, and that was around what kind of training methods or competency building methods and content works best, and especially for maintaining skills and retaining staff over time. I love this idea that you just talked about, country speed dating. Can you talk more about other kind of training methods that you've used?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and invariably what the participants like the best and what seems to be most effective in terms of actually delivering, you know, the competencies or the knowledge that you're trying to is a combination of lecture presentation, but also experiential learning, and either make it field-based or at least make it exercise-based. And the reason I say that is because I did coordinate a number of training events for INTERPOL, and where we could, we always included, if we had the right audience, we took them to the field and did crime scene investigation training. And you can't do that unless you're willing to mock up a crime scene and actually work them through it under a situation that is as close to real world as possible. And then there was times where I had much higher level managers and we were doing operational planning exercises, and we did a lot of desk-based exercises. So you're not out in the field, but you're bringing either multi-agencies together or even better, multi-agency and multinational groups together, and you're having them work through the standardized parts of a large-scale operational plan for wildlife enforcement operations. Those types of activities do a lot more than just reading off PowerPoints, obviously. The other thing, and why I said, Megan, you know, I tend to flow right from, you know, what works to where the challenges are, but and this is a good example, is the other thing you hear a lot, and we talk about it, and it's centered to our institutionalization focus for capacity building, is, you know, train the trainer and give them the ability to take that and duplicate it in their organizations. And I think a common mistake is that the expectation, I've seen it again and again and again, the expectation is you can do that in a 5-day course. And it's just not possible. So you're either training a trainer to how to deliver and how, you know, adult learning and the different ways of reaching groups and how to talk in front of people and how to give field, you know, put together field exercises, or you're delivering content. And if you try to do both, it just becomes a much longer course. And that's not, I think that's still the right answer, but I'm just making a pitch that the recognition has to be there that when you do that, those that become 3 to 4 week courses, not 5-day workshops.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm glad you brought some of those points up. I was going to ask you, how do you keep this from being a one-off training or a check-the-box kind of mentality, like, okay, we did this training and we trained them and now they're perfect. I mean, how do you do this kind of work over the long term, and how, and this is a question we have from a participant, how do you keep that enthusiasm going and actually make it translate to seizures or less crime?
Right. Well, no, I appreciate that, and it's because one, you should be delivering training that's based on some type of needs assessment, not because a donor thinks that that's where, you know, something that should happen. That's when people talk about supply driven rather than demand driven, but also just getting buy-in. So you know, when we're going to go deliver training, we're going to use local instructors, and we're going to get their buy-in and their understanding that this program is eventually going to be turned over to them, and that's the way to keep this going. But it takes a huge commitment. I've seen where these challenges can be overcome, and I've seen where, frankly, organizations just can't afford to let somebody go for 3 weeks. So you got to do a lot of you know, selling why, selling what the return is going to be, and then looking at, you know, and I think the answer is, you know, you got to look at what you're actually trying to, what the objectives of that capacity building are and what you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to hopefully just checking a box.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen programs, or do you have any experience with programs that might take an institutional focus versus an individual focus? I'm thinking of, like, in Africa, some of the work with Kenya Wildlife Service versus holding trainings for individuals. I'm just wondering if in Asia or anywhere else that you've worked, you've seen kind of a long-term focused effort on building the skills of X countries' customs enforcement staff, or on their police officers or a special unit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I've seen both. You know, and frankly, I've delivered both. I've delivered training that was because somebody had money and they just wanted to deliver ABC in this country and go to work. Usually you can do well, but I argue that it's probably not sustainable, and you're not making meaningful change in those organizations or those countries. I think where you're making changes when it's part of a larger plan, and it's a plan that has buy-in from the countries and the organizations or the agencies you're working with. I think it's really that simple, but it's a commitment, and I think I have been, you know, a lot of the training that was delivered on the arrest program, in particular because it recognized the need to measure the effectiveness of the training, and it had budgeted in for meaningful follow-up to training, meaning however many months later that they determined was appropriate, they would go back and talk to the participants that they trained and say, are you using these competencies? Have you, did they improve your ability to respond to ABC? And get some feedback, and then tailor the next one to make sure. And I think, unfortunately, very few programs do that, because you actually have to build in that that's part of your training program, is that you're going to go back and test and see if your people are still in place and whether they feel like that training continues to make a difference for them.
Mm-hmm. And
Sal,
really,
I'm sorry, Sal, you might want to talk about the follow-up trainings that you're planning to setting up some working groups that like coordinate of people who was trained. I think that's good examples.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we are, we're looking to build this cadre of trainers. We're looking to put training in place that has these mechanisms for going back and re-engaging with the participants. For me, even better, and I will tell you, you've asked from experience, one of the models that I do believe worked, that Interpol used, was they would train in a number of different areas, either geographically or whatever, on a particular competency, and then they would organize an operation and actually exercise that competency and put it into an actual approach to a law enforcement operation. And I think that's good, because the way to do this and make sure it sticks is to not only deliver it, test it, make sure it's being grasped, but then to actually put it to use, and then go back and continue to give that tender loving care.
So directly related to this question, one of our participants, Carrie, has a question about, have you run into any challenges about communicating the successes of these training initiatives, especially about how to balance the requirements for USAID support and partner security, or even the risk of embarrassing country partners, like making them seem weak? How have you messaged those things?
All of that is a challenge, and we struggle, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around how do you determine effectiveness of training. I personally, the more I've been doing this, what I am trying to move the needle on is more and more effective law enforcement responses to wildlife crime in this region, because frankly, there's just a standard response in this area. To do a seizure, make it very public, everybody high fives each other at the media event, and then there's very little to zero follow-up to that. That, to me, those are actually failures. That removes product from an illegal supply chain with zero accountability, that just results in trying to refill that product demand. If there's no accountability and there's no deterrent for ongoing activity, that's actually, in my mind, counterproductive. So we're trying to get that mindset into these agencies, and frankly, we're trying to get that mindset into the media as well, as to recognize that these press releases for seizures alone are not very meaningful. But to measure effectiveness in terms of what you should expect after a training event that shows that you're doing the right things is a very difficult prospect. And to me, the more we can try to measure and make sure that the people that we're delivering these competencies, these capacities, and building these networks around, if they can deliver more effective responses and follow-up investigation to seizures and arrests that result in those investigations, and hopefully down the line prosecutions that come from those arrests, those are the successes we should be looking for.
No, thanks for that. I think that those are great lessons. I'm going to move on to our last question before opening it up to the participants for any further questions we have. And I think we all focus on learning and the positive sides of learning, and realize that sometimes learning from your failures give you some of the best lessons. So what do you see as the most common mistakes made by law enforcement capacity building projects? And we actually have participants from Central America, Latin America, Africa, and here in Washington. So you're communicating to USAID staff who are implementing these kinds of projects right now. So what kind of words of advice do you have for them?
Well, we talked about the pitfall of kind of a check in the box one-off mentality, and I think most of people are getting that. So I'll just move on. The other thing is, to the extent, and we talked about this as well, is to plan activities that are around understood and validated needs, so that we're not pushing what an outside owner or an outside coordinator thinks is important, but we're pushing capacity building where the target audience has a recognized need, and then you'll get local buy-in, and it'll be sustainable, and it'll meet specific needs. The other thing I will say, just as a challenge, is that, or common mistake, is failure to deconflict, and in my mind, even better yet, coordinate capacity building activities. Even with what I said about, and I mean what I said in terms of building partnerships, but the Southeast Asian region here is a very noisy region in terms of players that are all doing very similar activities. And I undertook an assessment in March that we're just finalizing to look at all the initiatives and where organizations and donors are spending money and what activities what support activities they're taking on, just to take a look and try to figure out where the gaps and the opportunities to work together are. But we across the board, and everybody that I've talked to seems to admit that you know, we do a fair job at telling each other what we're doing. We don't do a very good job at all of actually sitting there and going the next step and saying, all right, well, how can we work with each other? How can we support each other? And I wanted to make a specific mention about a UNODC partnership that I mentioned earlier. But I sat down with the program manager for the UNODC in this region, and I asked him, I said, do you have any things you would really like to be doing towards the end of the year, but you just don't have the funding or the ability to take them on? And he said yes, and he shared, he said they're doing a very mid to high level manager meeting around customs in the region in September. He said, I would really love to be able to also be doing specific customs capacity building in ports around that same time. So we're talking to the managers at the same time we're working with the field people. And I looked at our work plan. I worked with Jesse a little bit, and we talked about it, and we said we think we can help you do that. So that's just an example of how look at somebody else's work plan and figure out how you can actually do something that you're probably going to deliver somewhere down the line anyway, and how you can help build off of their efforts and do something even more meaningful.
That's great. I had just one subcomponent to this question I wanted to ask before throwing it out there to others, and that was, we've talked a lot here about law enforcement officers. Do you have anything that you could share with us about how it might differ when you're actually working with judiciary or prosecutorial staff?
Yeah, I can share some recent experience about that. I participated in, it was a UNODC workshop that they had here in Bangkok a month or so ago, focused on prosecutors. And what I felt when I was sitting in that meeting was that this group of prosecutors was about 1.5 years behind their colleague investigators talking about the same things. I thought that was just pretty interesting, is to realize that the investigators had gone through this process of, well, can we share information informally, and can we really work together without, sending letters of rogatory and, formal mutual legal assistance treaty agreements. And they had worked through that and got to a point where they're like, yeah, we need to go to work, and we can, and then we'll follow up the formal channels when we need to follow up the formal channels. The prosecutors are still figuring that out, and not unsurprisingly is that when you talk to a group of lawyers, they get very wrapped around formality. But by the end of the program, they were also talking about having informal networks of communication. So it just seemed to me like they were 1.5 years behind, and they were just getting pulled along.
Yeah, I know. Early on, I learned that one does not train judges. They don't like that concept of that they're being trained. We have a question here from Hari about, do you have any ideas about how we can link law enforcement actions to actually keeping animals alive in the field? What are the law enforcement authorities doing to analyze how to link wildlife products to a certain region, and how other actors can help with that? Is that a part of your training?
Yeah, I can speak to it because I can just speak as how difficult it actually is. And where I think it actually will probably be a mistake in the long run to try to figure out how any specific efforts are affecting a population anywhere. I mean, I am sure, and I can probably, Jesse's pointed out a pretty good example of rhino population in Nepal, that specific law enforcement efforts and, partnerships around that population can be attributed to, you know, its direct improvement. But when you're talking about, you know, elephant ivory and rhino horn, and at this point it is so difficult to determine the source of those ivories and the populations involved, because where they come from and where they transit through may have nothing to do with where they were poached, and in a lot of cases it has zero to do. And there's some efforts in terms of DNA sampling ongoing to try to paint a better picture of that, but for sometimes political reasons and sometimes God only knows what reasons, there's varying levels of acceptance of that in different countries of even wanting to send samples for DNA analysis. So it's just very difficult, which is why, again, my perspective is I think a better metric at the end of the day is, if you're providing law enforcement capacity building, is it resulting in more meaningful law enforcement responses? And frankly, let somebody else deal with, is it creating, you know, an impact on population somewhere?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go back just briefly to answer a question from Ben Shapiro in the Caribbean, and that was just to hear a little bit more about your experience with UNODC and in the region, and also kind of what has been the experience for the countries. They're contemplating now working further in the Caribbean region with UNODC, since they've offered to serve as a management body to assist partner countries. So I think Ben was interested in just knowing what your experience was like with UNODC in the region.
Yeah. But I have to tell you that again, I'll say that the reason that partnership is working is because of personalities. You've just got somebody in play here who's willing to be collaborative, sees the value in doing that, and is willing to sit down and actually look at ways we can work together better. Am reticent to say that that's probably the case everywhere. I just don't know, and I don't know who's in charge of the Caribbean when. Although I'm just curious, can they respond as what was his name? Balderramo. Is he still the leader of that when? Chair? I think it was out of Costa Rica. Anyway, all right.
Ben so might be on mute, but he can answer in the chat box if he can answer that question. You might need to keep going. I'm not sure if...
yeah, no, I'm not sure I have too much more to offer. Is that okay. I would say, again, the things that we do that are collaborative are the right things. So it couldn't hurt to reach out and look to let them take a lead role and just manage it.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Sal. I've put out the last call for questions online. If anybody wants to type in a question, we can try to squeeze it in. But I would like to go now to the next slide to talk about the case study compilation that we're launching today with Sal in this webinar about, you know, learning more about what works best in capacity building for law enforcement. So today we're launching this global case study compilation effort. We hope to get completely overwhelmed with case studies being submitted. Our colleagues at Measuring Impact are prepared for that event. We'd like to work and really kind of document all of these kind of lessons so that in the future, Sal, we can, in addition to tapping your brain in these kinds of learning events, we can also have a compilation of different people's experiences around the world and how to best build capacity for law enforcement. So you'll see we're going to send out materials that I hope that my aid colleagues will help disseminate broadly with your partners, that Wildlife Asia can help us disseminate in Asia, similar efforts in Africa. This is not just AID funded, this is meant to be the international experience in wildlife capacity building, or law enforcement capacity building rather, and we will compile and select a subset of those cases to really dive in deeply and pull together So they're due on July 21st. I think Sean's going to click to the website to show where you can find more information. In a follow-up email, I will be sending around this link to everybody so you don't have to write this down now. But I just wanted to put this idea in your head and ask for your support in distributing this call for case studies. I think Sean's going to click through the website now so you can see what we're looking at doing. We hope to bring a subset of the case studies that are selected for an in-person learning event sometimes in the fall. We haven't gone through those details of the where, when, and how quite exactly yet, but I think you can do so much through webinars like this, but at some point you actually have to talk face-to-face, and so this is just a way that we hope to document and be able to share lessons learned, and then also bring people together to further explore this topic. I think Sean has put a link in the chat box, and we actually have an answer from Ben about his question on Caribbean WENs, but it will be separate from the Central America WEN that you mentioned, Sal. So I think with that and with no further questions, I just want to send out a huge thank you to Sal and Jesse for staying up late for us and for sharing your depth of experience. I'm pretty sure, Sal, that I could talk to you for a long time about these experiences, and I think we are really lucky to have you working with USAID and our partners in Wildlife Asia, and just thanks so much for sharing your vast amount of experience with us. It's really appreciated.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope that was of value.
Thank you, Sal, and thank you, Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.